Be me. Or rather, don't be me. Be Capri. 28. Living in a major city where the rent is offensive and the dating pool is a dumpster fire. I have a good job in corporate strategy, focusing on building more inclusive and equitable workplace environments. I'm basically a professional problem solver, so you'd think I could solve my own problems. My biggest problem? Men. I'd been on the apps for what felt like a lifetime. Every evening was the same routine. Come home from a long day of deconstructing systemic issues at work. Make a kale smoothie. Sit on my perfectly curated gray sofa and open the gates to hell. 100 new faces, 100 new ways to be disappointed. The sheer lack of effort was astounding. Hey, you up? A blurry photo of a fish someone caught 3 years ago. I'm an intelligent, successful woman. I have my life together. I volunteer on weekends. I read nonfiction. I have a 5-year plan. And my reward is sifting through a digital slush pile of men who think a winky face emoji is a personality. It was exhausting. It was emotional labor of the highest order. I complained about this to my friend Nyla over brunch a couple of months back. We were at this cute little vegan place that charges you a fortune for avocado toast. I was scrolling through my messages, just showing her the absolute wasteland. One guy had just messaged me, asking if I was as fun as I looked. I felt my eye start to twitch. Nyla just sipped her oat milk latte, looking completely unbothered. She is one of those people who is always calm because she's already figured everything out. She told me I was approaching dating all wrong. She said, "Capri, you're a strategist. You manage complex projects with multiple stakeholders. Why are you treating your love life like a game of chance?" That actually made me pause. She explained that I was letting them set the terms of engagement. I was passively waiting for someone decent to float to the top of the sewer. Her point was that I needed to be proactive. I needed to establish my own framework, a vetting process. She said that in a world full of low-effort men, a woman with high standards and clear boundaries is a queen, and that I needed to start acting like one. The conversation was like a lightning bolt. All my frustrations suddenly crystallized into a single, clear objective. I wasn't just going to set standards. I was going to publish them. I spent the next week working on it like it was a major project at work. I realized that dating apps were the problem. Too impersonal, too easy for them to hide. I needed a face-to-face environment, but one that was efficient. Speed dating. It was perfect. A series of short, structured interviews. My project had a name. Operation Filter. Nyla was my biggest supporter. We had a brainstorming session over wine one Tuesday night. She was throwing out ideas, getting more and more passionate. You need to be explicit about allyship. Make sure they understand emotional labor isn't just your job. Don't even entertain anyone who argues about the pay gap. It was incredibly validating. I felt seen. I created a document. It started as a list of bullet points in my notes app, but it grew into something more. This wasn't just a list of my personal preferences. This was a blueprint for a healthy, equitable relationship in the modern age. I gave it a proper title, The Mutual Respect Manifesto, a foundation for equitable partnership. It sounded professional. It sounded serious, because it was. The manifesto was divided into sections. The first section was core principles. It covered the non-negotiables, things like a deep, demonstrated commitment to intersectional feminism, an understanding that his privilege is real and that he must be actively working to dismantle it. I even included a line that said he should be prepared to provide recent examples of this work. It's not enough to say you're an ally. You have to show the receipts. The second section was communication and emotional labor. This part clarified that I wouldn't be his therapist, his mother, or his social secretary. Emotional intelligence was a must. He had to be fluent in I statements and nonviolent communication. I specified that any dismissal of my feelings as overreacting or being too sensitive would be grounds for immediate termination of the interaction. Then there was the section on social and financial equity. This was the part I was most proud of. It tackled the awkward money stuff head on. I stated that to counteract the historical and ongoing gender pay gap, a male partner should ideally earn at least 30% more than me. This wasn't about me being a gold digger. It was about restorative justice. It also clarified that on dates, the man pays. It's a simple, traditional gesture that acknowledges the systemic disadvantages women face. The final document was a full page, single-spaced. It was concise, professional, and left no room for misinterpretation. I read it to Nyla over the phone. There was a moment of silence when I finished. Then she just said, "Capri, this is a masterpiece. This is the filter the world needs." The next day, I went to a print shop during my lunch break. I had it printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, and then I asked the guy at the counter to laminate it. He gave me a weird look, but I didn't care. The lamination was symbolic. It made the manifesto durable, official, unchangeable. Holding the finished product was a power trip. It felt solid in my hands, a shield against all the toxic masculinity in the world. I booked my ticket for a speed dating event for the following week. It was at a bar downtown, one of those places with exposed brick and craft beer. I felt a little nervous, but mostly I felt powerful. I was taking control. I was setting the narrative. The night of the event, I took my time getting ready. I chose an outfit that was professional but stylish, a power blazer over a silk camisole. I wanted to look like a woman who knew her worth. I put the laminated manifesto in my leather tote bag. I arrived at the bar about 15 minutes early. The place was already buzzing. A good mix of people, all looking a bit nervous and hopeful. I saw other women laughing with each other, looking friendly and open. I pitied them a little. They were going into this blind, armed with nothing but hope. I was armed with a strategy. I checked in and got my number. Table 7. I found my spot, a small table for two in the middle of the room. I sat down, took a deep breath, and placed the manifesto on the table. I propped it up against the little flower vase so it was standing upright, facing the empty chair. It looked perfect, like a very important notice. A few people glanced over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and confusion. I ignored them. Let them wonder. They would all understand soon enough. The host rang a little bell and announced that the first round was starting. I smoothed down my blazer, sat up straight, and prepared for my first candidate. A guy walked over to my table. He looked normal. Probably in his early 30s. Decent shirt, nice smile. "Hi, I'm Alex," he said, sitting down. "Capri," I replied, giving him a polite but firm nod. His eyes immediately went to the laminated sheet standing on the table. He squinted to read the title. A little smile played on his lips. "The Mutual Respect Manifesto," he read aloud. "Wow, is there going to be a quiz?" He was trying to be funny. I wasn't there for jokes. "It's a framework for our conversation," I said, my tone completely level. "I find it's best to establish a baseline of mutual understanding from the start." His smile vanished. It was like watching a light bulb flicker and die. "Oh," he said. "Okay." He leaned forward, trying to read the fine print. I watched his eyes scan the first few bullet points under core principles. I saw his eyebrows go up. He read for about 20 seconds in complete silence. Then he leaned back in his chair and just stared at me. "So, you're serious," he said. It wasn't a question. "I take my personal connections very seriously," I confirmed. He nodded slowly, still looking at me with this strange expression. It wasn't angry. It was baffled. He glanced around the room, at all the other tables where people were laughing and talking. Then he looked back at me and my manifesto. "You know what?" he said, pushing his chair back. "I think I'm going to go grab a water before the next round." He stood up and walked away. The bell hadn't even rung yet. Our 5 minutes weren't up. I watched him go over to the bar and order a drink. He didn't come back. My first thought was, good. The system works. Filter activated. He clearly wasn't willing to engage on a substantive level. He couldn't handle a woman with clearly defined standards. His loss. I straightened the manifesto and waited for the bell. The bell rang. A new guy approached the table. This one was a bit more confident, maybe a little arrogant. He had that tech bro look. He sat down, introduced himself, and then immediately pointed at the sheet. "What's your deal?" he asked. Not rudely, just directly. I gave him the same explanation I gave the first guy. Unlike the first one, this guy actually picked it up. He held the laminated sheet in his hands, turning it over like it was some weird artifact. He didn't read it carefully, just skimmed it. I saw his eyes stop on the social and financial equity section. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was more of a scoff. He put the manifesto back on the table, but he didn't prop it up. He just laid it flat, like something he was finished with. "All right," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I'll bite. What kind of equitable partnership are you looking for exactly?" There was a definite edge in his voice. He was testing me. I started to explain the principles behind my framework, using some of the language from my job about creating psychological safety and fostering belonging. He wasn't really listening. He was just watching me, a little smirk on his face. About a minute into my explanation, he just held up a hand to stop me. "Yeah, I get it," he said. "You're looking for a project, not a partner." Before I could even respond to that incredibly bad faith interpretation of my work, he stood up. "Thanks for the presentation," he said, with heavy sarcasm. "Good luck with your search." He walked away and went to talk to one of the event organizers, occasionally glancing back at my table. 2 down. I felt a tiny prickle of annoyance. The first guy was clearly intimidated. This guy was just an arrogant jerk. The filter was working perfectly, maybe even better than I expected. It was weeding out the fragile egos and the cynical misogynists. I set the manifesto back up in its proud, upright position. The bell rang. The third guy was different. Younger, maybe mid-20s. Looked a little shy, like an art student or something. He sat down and gave me a sweet, nervous smile. He noticed the sheet, and his smile faltered. "Hi," he said softly. "What's that for?" His approach was much less confrontational, so I softened my tone a bit. I explained that it was just a way for me to be upfront about my values. He nodded, like he understood. He leaned in and read it. And he actually read it. I watched his face as he went through each point. He was frowning, but in a confused way, not an angry one. He got to the part about financial equity and paused. "I'm sorry," he said, looking up at me, his eyes full of genuine confusion. "I'm not sure I understand this part. It says, you want someone who earns more than you for justice?" He seemed genuinely curious. He wanted to understand. I saw this as a teachable moment, so I began to explain the concept of the systemic pay gap, how it compounds over a woman's lifetime, and how equitable partnerships require acknowledging and correcting for these historical imbalances. I was probably about 2 minutes into my explanation. I was being very patient, very clear, and then I saw his eyes start to glaze over. He was nodding, but he wasn't hearing me anymore. He was just a young guy who came here to maybe meet a nice girl, and instead he was getting a lecture from a corporate D&I strategist. The bell rang, and I've never seen someone look so relieved in my life. "Oh, Belle," he said, jumping up. "It was really, informative meeting you." He practically fled from my table. A little bit of doubt started to creep in. It was a tiny little voice in the back of my head. Maybe this is a bit much. I pushed it down immediately. No, this is necessary. The discomfort is part of the process. It's challenging their preconceived notions. The fourth guy approached. And this is when things started to change. He didn't even get to the table. He was walking towards it, saw me, saw the laminated sheet from a distance. He stopped. He literally stopped in the middle of the aisle, looked at my table, looked at me, and then did a slow, deliberate 180-degree turn. He walked over to another guy who was also waiting, and they just started talking, deciding to sit this round out together. He didn't even give me a chance. He judged me from a distance based on a single piece of paper. That one stung a little. It felt unfair. The 5 minutes of that round passed in complete awkward silence. I just sat there, alone at my table, trying to look busy by checking my phone. But I wasn't busy. I was just sitting there. I could feel people looking at me. I could hear the tables around me buzzing with conversation. A woman at the next table was laughing so hard she snorted. The sound felt incredibly loud in my bubble of silence. The bell rang again. Time for the next partner. I looked up, hopeful. The man who was supposed to come to my table was at the table next to mine. He finished his conversation there, stood up, and looked at his schedule. He saw that my table, number 7, was next. He looked right at me. We made eye contact. And then he just shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He turned and walked straight to the bar. He would rather get a drink he didn't need than spend 5 minutes talking to me. Okay. Now it was getting weird. This wasn't just filtering anymore. This felt like a boycott. It dawned on me that the men were probably talking to each other between rounds. Avoid table 7. There's a crazy lady over there with a laminated rule book. The thought made my cheeks burn. They were turning my attempt at creating a safe and equitable space into a joke. It was a classic example of male fragility. They couldn't handle a woman who knew what she wanted, so they colluded to exclude her. My initial doubt was replaced by a simmering anger. This wasn't my fault. This was them. This was proof of exactly why my manifesto was so necessary in the first place. I sat through another round, alone, and another. It was public humiliation, unfolding in 5-minute increments. By now, it was obvious to everyone what was happening. The event host kept glancing over at me with a worried expression. Some of the other women were looking at me too, but their expressions were more pity than anything else. That was almost worse. I didn't want their pity. I was stronger than them. I was smarter than them. But as I sat there, table after table, in profound silence, while the rest of the world laughed and talked and connected, that feeling of strength began to feel very, very thin. The host rang the bell for what felt like the 10th time. The sound was starting to grate on my nerves. Each chime was a fresh announcement of my failure. I looked up, not with hope anymore, but with a kind of morbid curiosity. Who would reject me next? How would they do it? A man was approaching my table. He was older than the others, maybe in his late 40s. He had kind eyes and a slightly tired look about him, like a dad who's seen it all. He was the first person to come to my table in almost half an hour. My heart gave a little flutter. Maybe he would be different. He sat down and gave me a small, polite smile. "Hello there, I'm Mark." "Capri," I said, my voice a little rusty from disuse. He didn't even look at the manifesto at first. He just looked at me. "So," he started, "tough night?" The question caught me off guard. It was gentle, almost sympathetic. I didn't know how to answer. "It's been revealing," I said, trying to sound detached and clinical. He finally glanced at the laminated sheet. He didn't pick it up, just read the title from his seat. "The Mutual Respect Manifesto," he said, nodding to himself. "That's quite a title." He looked back at me, and his expression wasn't mocking or confused. It was sad. "Can I be honest with you, Capri?" he asked. I just nodded, bracing myself for another lecture or a quick escape. "I'm divorced," he said quietly. "Been for about 3 years. My ex-wife, she had a lot of rules, too. A lot of expectations. I spent 15 years trying to meet them. I read all the books she gave me. I went to the workshops. I tried to use the right words, the right frameworks." He paused, looking down at his hands. "And in the end, none of it mattered. Because it was never really about partnership. It was about me passing an endless series of tests. And eventually, I just got tired. I got so tired of being tested." He looked up and his eyes met mine. "I'm a good man. I'm a good father. I'm respectful. I'm honest. But when I see something like this," he gestured to the manifesto, "it doesn't read like a foundation for respect. It reads like a job description for a position I don't want. It reads like the final exam for a course I never signed up for." He wasn't angry. He was just weary. "I came here tonight hoping to meet someone I could have a nice conversation with, maybe share a laugh, not to be vetted." The bell rang. It was the final round. He gave me another small, sad smile. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, and it sounded like he genuinely meant it. He stood up and walked away. His words hung in the air long after he was gone. Tired of being tested. The phrase echoed in my head. The event ended a few minutes later. The host thanked everyone for coming. The room erupted into a buzz of post-event chatter. People were getting up, mingling, exchanging numbers written on little cards. I saw the guy from the second round, the arrogant tech bro, laughing with a woman who had been sitting a few tables down from me. She was laughing too. They looked happy. I saw the shy young guy talking to a girl with bright pink hair. They were both smiling. Everyone was connecting. Everyone was moving on. And I was just sitting there, an island. My manifesto lay flat on the table, where the tech bro had put it. It looked pathetic, a discarded piece of laminated garbage. I felt a hot wave of shame wash over me, so intense it was dizzying. I grabbed my bag, shoved the manifesto inside, and practically ran out of the bar. I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want to see their pity or their smug satisfaction. The cold night air hit my face, but it didn't cool the burning in my cheeks. I walked home in a daze. The city lights were a blur. The whole way the man's words kept playing over and over in my mind, tired of being tested. Was that what I was doing? Was this whole thing just one big test? I got back to my apartment. It was silent. Usually I love the silence. It's my sanctuary. But tonight, it was deafening. It felt like an accusation. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked into the living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sank onto my perfect gray sofa. My phone buzzed in my bag. I knew who it was without looking. I pulled out my phone. A text from Nyla. "OMG, how did it go? Did the manifesto work its magic? Tell me everything. Did you eviscerate the patriarchy?" There was a string of emojis, a crown, a flexed bicep, a bomb. I stared at the message. The words seemed like they were from a different language, a different universe. Eviscerate the patriarchy? I hadn't eviscerated anything. I had just sat alone in a crowded room for 2 hours. I had made myself a spectacle, a joke. I thought about what to reply. The old me, the me from this morning, would have crafted a long, angry text. I would have told her how fragile and toxic men were, how they couldn't handle a strong woman. I would have framed it as a victory. The system worked. It filtered out 100% of the candidates. Nyla would have agreed. She would have sent more validating emojis. We would have reinforced each other's worldview, safe in our little bubble of superiority. But I couldn't do it. The words felt like ash in my mouth. I didn't reply. I just turned my phone over and let the screen go dark. I sat there in the silence and the dark for a long time. I thought about my job, about the workshops I lead. I was always talking about creating spaces of psychological safety, about fostering open dialogue, about assuming good intent. And what had I done tonight? I had created the least psychologically safe space imaginable. I had walked in with a list of demands, assuming the worst intent from every single person. I hadn't been looking for a dialogue. I had been delivering a monologue. The hypocrisy of it was crushing. I pulled the manifesto out of my bag. Even in the dim light from the window, the laminated surface had a slight sheen. It looked so official, so certain. My whole identity was wrapped up in that piece of paper. Capri, the strategist. Capri, the one who had it all figured out. Capri, the strong woman who didn't need a man, but would accept a worthy one if he passed her rigorous evaluation. I remembered the look in the last man's eyes, the weariness. He hadn't seen a strong woman. He'd seen a tired, lonely woman building walls and calling them standards. No, that wasn't right. He'd seen something worse. He'd seen his ex-wife. He'd seen the source of his pain and exhaustion, and he had politely excused himself. I wasn't a queen on a throne. I was a dragon guarding an empty cave. I had spent years building this fortress around myself. Every bad date, every ghosted message, every disappointment was another brick in the wall. My feminist principles, which had started as a source of strength and clarity, had curdled into a rigid, unforgiving ideology. Nyla hadn't helped. She wasn't a friend. She was an enabler, an echo chamber. She cheered every time I added another brick to the wall, telling me how safe and strong I was becoming. But I wasn't safe. I was just alone. I thought about the other women at the bar, the ones I had pitied. They were taking a risk. They were opening themselves up to connection, to conversation, to the possibility of rejection. They were being vulnerable. And I had mistaken their vulnerability for weakness. I had built a system that made it impossible for me to be rejected, because it made it impossible for anyone to get close in the first place. It was a perfect, self-defeating loop. I stood up and walked over to my kitchen. I held the laminated manifesto in my hands. It felt heavy. For a moment, I thought about keeping it, as a reminder. But it wasn't a reminder I needed. It was an anchor pulling me down. I held it over the trash can. My hand hesitated. Letting go of it felt like letting go of a part of myself, the part that was always right, the part that had all the answers. But that part of me was also profoundly, miserably lonely. I let it drop. It landed in the trash with a soft clatter on top of some used coffee grounds. It didn't look so official anymore. I went back to the sofa and picked up my phone. The message from Nyla was still there, glowing with cheerful, oblivious confidence. I thought about what I really wanted. It wasn't about winning an argument or proving a point. It wasn't about dismantling the patriarchy one speed dater at a time. I just wanted to not feel so alone. I wanted to maybe share a laugh with someone. I wanted to have a nice conversation. I held the manifesto in my hands. The plastic was stiff and unyielding. I took a deep breath and bent it. The resistance was strong. I had to use both hands, pressing my thumbs into the center. There was a loud, ugly cracking sound as the lamination split. A jagged white line appeared across the middle of the page, fracturing the perfect black text. I looked at the broken manifesto. It wasn't a shield anymore. It was just a broken piece of plastic. And for the first time in a very long time, in the quiet of my apartment, a new question appeared in my mind. It wasn't angry. It wasn't righteous. It was just quiet and small and terrifying. What if the problem isn't them?